May your spirit and guidance be in us as we work for the benefit of all our people for peace and justice in our land, and for the constant recognition of the dignity and aspirations of those whom we serve. Amen.
Minister statements. Minister statements. Minister responsible for infrastructure.
Mr. Speaker, one of the priorities of our government is to make strategic infrastructure investments that connect communities, expand the economy, and reduce the cost of living. There are a number of initiatives being undertaken to support this priority, and one of these is to continue to seek ways to advance the construction of all-season roads, such as the Mackenzie Valley Highway and the Clecho Highway. Mr. Speaker, investments in all-season roads may take time and money. Our government will continue to pursue these projects, but in the meantime, winter roads remain an essential part of the Northwest Territories transportation system. Communities across the North rely heavy on these roads to ensure the movement of goods and people during colder months. Today, I'm pleased to provide an update on the 2021 winter road season and fuel resupply activities. Every year, highway crews in the Beaufort Delta, the Sawtooth, the Detroit, North Slave regions build and maintain 1,469 kilometers of winter roads, ice crossing that connect 11 communities that are not served by our all-season roads. The Northwest Territories short winter road season is critical, as our roads are primary way essential goods are delivered to remote communities. This access helps to diversify the Northwest Territories economy, allows businesses to be more competitive, lower costs for northern residents. I would personally like to thank our highway crews across the territory for their hard work and dedication to opening and maintaining winter roads this past year. In spite of COVID-19 pandemic, these crews overcame fluctuating temperatures and other impacts of climate change to get our winter roads operating, and in some cases earlier than average opening dates. To enhance the level of service on some of our winter roads, our government has also formed a partnership with private sector. Specifically, we have aligned agreement with Enbridge Pipelines, to which the company provides funding to the N.W.T to accelerate the construction of the Toledo-Wrigley ice crossings and Highway Number 1 to support the movement of equipment. Mr. Speaker, our government understands the importance of essential goods such as fuel for our residents and businesses in northern communities. Many communities rely heavily on diesel and gasoline for electricity generation, heating, and transportation. The N.W.T is responsible for the purchase, transport, and storage of fuel for 16 communities here in the Northwest Territories that are not served by private sector. Local contractors then sell and distribute these petroleum products to residents and businesses. Despite the challenge of COVID-19, residents can rest assured that the N.W.T will continue to deliver fuel while taking every precaution necessary to protect our communities. Our staff and contractors have put rigorous safety measures in place to minimize risks related to COVID, while following the orders and recommendations of the Chief Public Health Officer. This winter, the N.W.T first fuel delivery took place February 1st. It is expected that the fuel resupply will be completed by mid-March, with a total of 7.5 million litres of fuel delivered to 7 communities. Mr. Speaker, I would like to acknowledge the staff and contractors for keeping communities connected safely, efficiently, and reliable. Our government will continue to work with our public and private sector partners to maintain dependable supply of goods and services to our communities, while identifying opportunities to improve our operations and infrastructure. Kuyinaini, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Minister statements. Minister statements. Minister responsible for education, culture, and employment.
Mr. Speaker, I am proud to celebrate the Francophone community of the Northwest Territories during the 23rd Annual Rendezvous de la Francophonie. This nationwide initiative Health every March is an opportunity for Canada's 10 million French speaker and all Canadians to celebrate and promote French language and culture. Through this year's Rendezvous de la Francophonie, Acadia, at the heart of my country, celebrations will highlight the fact that Acadia is the birthplace of Canada's Francophonie, while acknowledging the presence and contribution of Indigenous people in North America for thousands of years. Mr. Speaker, as we celebrate the Rendezvous de la Francophonie, I would like to acknowledge the hard work and dedication of the Francophone Affairs Secretariat. In response to COVID-19, they quickly adapted to provide prompt translations 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Their dedication has allowed our Francophone residents to access important health information in French throughout COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, this month, the government of the Northwest Territories and the federal government have finalized a funding agreement to support French language services. This agreement provides a multi-year collaborative framework between Canada and the Northwest Territories in order to support the planning and delivery of quality French language communications and services. The agreement also ensures stability and continuity in the delivery of services to the French residents of the Northwest Territories. Mr. Speaker, our diverse French population adds a cultural richness to our communities. I am proud of our ongoing efforts to support our Francophone residents and to strengthen the diversity of our territory. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Minister statements. Minister statements. Minister responsible for municipal and community affairs.
Sorry, I'll be doing my statement in English. I won't be doing it in Slavey. Today, Mr. Speaker, I would like to update the members on the progress we have made with our commitment to reduce the municipal funding gap and the additional funding support that we have been provided for community governments. This government committed to reducing the funding gap by $5 million, and we have made significant progress on this goal. This past fiscal year, we added $2.5 million on the ongoing funding for community governments. Early this year, MACA, Municipal and Community Affairs, engaged with the Northwest Territories Association of Communities to identify how best to strategically invest into new funding, knowing that the largest funding gap in the communities is public infrastructure. It was decided that this funding would be allocated to this priority. This additional funding, therefore, is earmarked for those 19 community governments who have capital funding gaps. In addition to the infrastructure investment, an additional $740,000 has been approved in the 21-22 budget, which MACA is allocating to the environmental services funding to support community governments with the delivery of water, sewer, and solid waste services for residents. Mr. Speaker, our mandate commitment is more than just a funding initiative. It also includes a commitment to provide communities with new opportunities to raise additional revenue. In 2021, MACA, along with the Department of Lands and the Department of the Executive and Indigenous Affairs, have been developing a process guide for municipal governments to manage lands within their municipal boundaries. As part of this process, we are also considering current government of the Northwest Territories policies and procedures that may require amendments for the transfer of lands that would better position municipal governments to have administration and control of lands within their municipality, and removal of barriers for land transfers, allowing communities to advance their own priorities for land development and present more own source revenue opportunities. MACA's commitment also includes working with communities to reduce or stabilize the cost of delivering core programs and services. This summer, we will be working with communities in the Beaufort Delta and Sawtooth regions to coordinate removal of hazardous waste stockpiles within their landfills. This project, as a part of the implementation of the Northwest Territories Waste Resource Management Strategy, will reduce contaminants of the Northwest Territories lands and extend the lifespan of community landfills. Working will continue in other regions as the federal funding has been applied for, and we will continue this work. We are also working towards implementing the Northwest Territories Asset Management Strategy for communities. The Asset Management Strategy will provide communities with more information to implement best practices, improve maintenance, and lower the cost due to equipment failures and emergency repairs. MACA has already trained 6 communities to use the computerized asset management program and have plans for up to 7 more in 2021. Mr. Speaker, with additional investment for community governments, I'm proud to say we are well on our way to meet our mandate commitment. The Department will continue to advance this mandate commitment in future years to include the remaining $1.7 million to reach the total mandate investment of $5 million. We know the challenges in our communities and our governments that we are facing. We will continue to advocate and support them to address their priorities, whatever is possible. Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Minister statements, member statements, member statements, member for Tunde Wilde.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today I'd like to talk about the welcome news from the N.W.T. Housing Corp regarding new houses set to be built within the riding of Tunde Wilde and across the territories. Last week, Minister Chin, along with MP Michael McLeod and the Federal Minister of Families, Children and Social Development, all made a joint announcement about the allocation of funds to construct 60 new homes for several N.W.T. communities. That's awesome. Mr. Speaker, of those 60 housing units, 10 will be constructed within my constituency, which includes 4 for Futsoke, 4 for Denukwe, and 2 for Dilo and Dela. I'm very happy to hear that these new houses will begin construction this year. I know there are long waiting lists in all my communities for people looking for housing, so I know this project will help alleviate our strong housing demand. And Mr. Speaker, when I was writing this last night, I watched a show and it made me change my member statement a little. I watched a show called New Amsterdam. It's a medical drama, and there was this doctor, real humanitarian, dealt with a homeless person, and it's fictional, of course, but it made me really think about this. When dealing with this patient, they discovered that this patient was homeless and racked up a huge amount of money to this hospital, $1 million, testing, psychiatric evaluations, blood tests, you name it. And it turns out after a good visit with the doctor, this homeless person just needed a place to stay. And you can't help but wonder what the unforeseen costs are for a lot of our systems, justice, health and social services. Just simply, all we need to do is just give somebody a key to go into an apartment or home, and shelter is so important and feel safe, and it's so important for our mental health. And with this announcement, I think we should all we should scream this right from the top of the hills here. This, I think, is just huge, with this announcement, and it'll take a huge bite out of our mandate items and move in that direction. And it's something tangible. And we sit back, we have a healthy tension with back and forth in this chamber, but I think this is something that we could really announce as a group, and and give people hope. I think that's so important moving forward. Hope, and show that people at territories that we can work as a team and do some good. Masicho, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Tunde-Welde. Member statements. Member statements. Member for N.W.T.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today, I just want to wish everybody back home and in the House Happy Easter, and have a good weekend and with our families, and look forward. The sun's back home in the Delta, so we're looking forward to the spring hunt and fishing. So looking forward to that. Getting excited to get home. I'd like really to all our constituents in the Delta and the N.W.T, please have a safe spring, and enjoy your time here with your families. I just want to, like we took part, myself and you, we went down and watched the dog races last weekend, and I would like to congratulate Grant Beck and Richard Beck, and then and Brent for first, second, and third. Grant is the 150 champion for an N.W.T, so congratulations to him. I know him really well, and I know how hard he worked to get there. And all the mushers who took part in that Canadian Championship, with even the 1 and 2 dog with the little kids racing, was always good to see up and coming dog mushers. It's been a long session, Mr. Speaker. This last 8 weeks, we did a lot of good work, and we worked together to get the session and the budget passed. And there's a lot of good things coming. I want to thank our government and our leadership there to keep moving forward and keep it up, and working with our colleagues on this side of the House, and I looking forward to keep on keeping on. But Mr. Speaker, still we're in COVID-19 times. Please, everybody back home, please get your vaccine, and follow the rules of the public health officer, and just be safe. Have a good spring, Mr. Speaker, and look forward to seeing you back in the Delta. Thank you.
Hear, hear. Thank you, Member for N.W.T. Member statements. Member statements. Member for Decho.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it has been another long, arduous year, ending with capital acquisition plans, business plans, and the cream de la crop, the main estimates. These exercises are a necessary evil as they set the departmental budgets for the upcoming new fiscal year. What I mean by necessary evil is the many long hours reviewing departmental budgets and then doing it all over again in its final stages during the Committee of the Whole. This entailed all 19 members to be present and working together to come up with the final budget that is somewhat satisfactory to regular MLAs on this side of the House and satisfies the needs of the departments and Cabinet. Mr. Speaker, one of the great benefits of this exercise is that we can all talk the same language, working for the benefit of all the residents of the Northwest Territories. When we can work together on budget issues and agree to provide more financial resources for programs and services, it's the residents that win. Similarly, it falls upon us all to dig deep to find the financial resources to cover those extra costs, as noted by the Finance Minister. Mr. Speaker, the residents of the Northwest Territories need to know this Legislative Assembly has their best interests at heart. This Legislative Assembly continues to investigate economic opportunities that will benefit northern businesses, which in turn benefits the residents of the Northwest Territories. Masi, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Decho. Member statements. Member statements. Member for Thabacha.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today is our last sitting day of this session until we return at the end of May. I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge all the essential workers throughout all regions of the N.W.T. I want to thank all the medical personnel in all N.W.T. medical facilities. which includes everyone from the janitors, the nurses, and the doctors to the specialists, patient advocates, and social workers, among others. Mr. Speaker, I would also like to thank all my colleagues, both the regular members side and on the cabinet side, for understanding what I am about and for putting up with me and my sometimes harsh line of questioning. We may not always agree on issues, but we never let personal animosity get in the way of getting things done. Furthermore, Mr. Speaker, I'd also like to once again thank all the staff here at the Legislative Assembly, as well as my own staff, my constituents' assistants, Priscilla Lapini and Pascal Erasmus. Staff plays a key role in functions of good governance, so I thank them for their work and their dedication. And I want to thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to wish everyone a very happy Easter. And as always, I thank the amazing constituents of Fort Smith for the honor of being your MLA for Thabatcha. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Thabatcha. Member statements. Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. While attempting to drill down into the Husky Oil Significant Discovery License, pun intended, I was astounded at how difficult it is to find any useful and accessible information about how our government actually administers oil and gas rights. ITI does not seem to have implemented its new responsibilities with the changes to the Petroleum Resources Act. While much of the secrecy surrounding rights management was supposed to be fixed, it is virtually impossible to get any coherent information on specific oil and gas rights holdings. There are 3 separate listings or web pages for information on oil and gas rights rather than a user-friendly integrated database or public registry. There's a series of web pages on monthly oil and gas rights activities, which is little more than a listing of license numbers and their disposition. No maps, no company names, no actual dates, just a lumping together of license numbers. A second, an unlinked set of pages has listings of the licenses and the actual documents. The listings are searchable by disposition type and the name of the company, but there's no data associated with the listings, such as dates, areas covered, work performed, or whatever. Lastly, there's a series of dated maps that have tables of license data that are not linked or user-friendly. These come from the previous calls for expressions of interest in petroleum development. Those have all failed to raise any interest since devolution. Elsewhere, you can find the annual oil and gas reports that have very busy maps in them, but none of this is linked in any way to the license or activity listings. So, Mr. Speaker, there's no searchable, user-friendly, integrated public registry for petroleum rights. Surely to goodness, 7 years after devolution and 19 months after the transparency provisions were passed in the House to provide stronger accountability in petroleum rights reporting, we can and should be able to do a lot better. There's lots of good examples out there about how that show how transparent and well-organized public registries can be set up. For example, the ones managed by the Land and Water Boards or the Mackenzie Valley Review Board. I have questions for the Minister of ITI and how we can improve public access to information on petroleum rights. Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Frame Lake. Member statements. Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, employment within the public sector is one of the main topics I hear about from my constituents after housing. Recently, I heard from a student who, after receiving an offer of employment, was being told that she now had to prove that she is the right type of Indigenous as she was born in Nunavut. An Indigenous engineering student on the path we encourage our youth to take, and still she is asked to prove herself for a summer job. This is not okay. Speaking with other Northern students and recent graduates, I'm bombarded with stories that detail the barriers to gaining employment by one of the largest Northern employers, our government. One such story is that of Carrie, born and raised in Yellowknife, who graduated from Sir John Franklin High School and studied graphic design. Carrie was a product of the Student Financial Assistance Program and studied design for 4 years when she maxed out her SFA benefits. During her postgraduate design studies, she was recruited by CBC National News, working for them for a time before coming home. Shortly after returning to the North, a position was available in the N.W.T for a graphic designer. Carrie applied for this position but was not successful. Upon appealing the decision process, she learned that this position was awarded to a Southerner by direct appointment. This is a perfect example of a qualified Priority 2 Northerner being passed over for a position within the N.W.T and failing to be protected by the system that had been developed to ensure qualified Northerners had meaningful employment. SFA needs to work hand in hand with human resources, proactively advising them of graduates and their professions. The N.W.T is paying for this education, and our talented Northern students must be viewed as an investment in our future. We often hear from Cabinet that the North does not produce educated people in fields that can be utilized by the N.W.T, leading to Southern hiring. We only have to look at several current and past deputy ministers to see that we don't make Northern candidates a priority when developing our human resources. While hiring from the South may not hurt the N.W.T fiscally, as every new resident means more in federal transfer payments, however, what are the indirect losses? The historic knowledge that's lost each time someone leaves a role, the impact on staff with each new manager or employee, or the impact on project work as Southern science and methods are applied out of ignorance or lack of experience. Additionally, many Southern hires only stay between 2 and 5 years. How much do we lose paying fees for recruitment, relocation costs, administration costs, etc.? Mr. Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to conclude my statement.
Thank you. The member seeking unanimous consent to conclude her statement. Are there any nays? There are no nays. You may conclude your statement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the N.W.T needs to take a hard look at our employment strategy to incorporate not only our Northern graduates upon their return, but to ensure that Northerners and people committed to the North are able to advance in the public sector. An integrated strategy is needed that involves not only HR, but incorporates the input of and data collected by ECE and SFA so that we are proactive about our workforce. This strategy should identify future employment trends and identify pathways to help Northerners work towards their employment goals and include cross-training, mentorship, and networking and job shadowing opportunities, as well as succession planning. Only when we invest in our people will we have a successful North. Thank you.
Thank you, member for Great Slave. Member statements. Member statements. Member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In October 2020, the City of Yellowknife voted to end fire services on the Ingham Trail. The most frustrating part of that decision was residents were only given 6 months to find an alternate solution. I employed the minister during the multiple city council votes to send someone from MACA to ask more time, knowing full well that the N.W.T could not find a solution within 6 months. But N.W.T bureaucracy doesn't move quickly, and the idea of someone approaching city council to pitch a case without going up and down 8 levels of bureaucracy first was an impossibility. Additionally, it seemed that finding a solution before April 1st was an impossibility, despite the best intentions of the minister. Mr. Speaker, I have repeatedly been told that a solution would be found before April 1st. In this House, on February 23rd, in this session, the minister said, I made a commitment that we will find a solution by April 1st. Well, Mr. Speaker, tomorrow is April 1st, and if your house is on fire on the Ingham Trail and you call 911, no one is going to show up. Mr. Speaker, the solution that has been presented was an options paper last week, whereas $1.7 million upfront and $1.2 million annually to be paid completely by residents of the Ingham Trail. Mr. Speaker, if this was the solution the minister had in time the whole time, I could have saved the department a lot of time by saying no one was going to go for that. If this was a multi-million-dollar problem, I could have said to the department and my residents that this wasn't going to happen back in October. Mr. Speaker, the department is now asking residents of the trail to pay $4,000 a year for fire services. This would be one of the highest taxes in the Northwest Territories. The department is of the position that all of this money must be recovered directly from residents. Mr. Speaker, I can't think of a single tax in this territory that is completely recovered by residents. 85% of our own budget comes from the federal government. The majority of our community's government funding comes from ours. Yet this one issue is to be completely recovered at a cost of $1.2 million for one fire a year, Mr. Speaker. I don't know what solution the department had in mind. Mr. Speaker, rather than prepare for the incoming loss of services, residents trusted the minister at their word and waited on the government when they said they would solve this problem. I am disappointed in the options paper, in this outcome. I am confused what MACA was thinking was going on the entire time. And Mr. Speaker, I'm disappointed we broke the trust of our residents. I'll have questions for the Minister of MACA about what can be done going forward. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Yellowknife North. Member statements. Member statements. Member for Haver South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My statement will be in English. Mr. Speaker, I have received numerous concerns from residents in Hay River with respect to the illicit drug trade and drug use in the community. Throughout the pandemic, we have heard stories of persons traveling back and forth across the border who are known drug dealers or persons known to be running drugs. How do we know? It is because our community is small. People talk, and most everyone knows everyone. With enough information, one is able to cut out the fiction and put some semblance of truth of what is really happening on the ground. We have heard how, throughout the pandemic, this government has been providing these dealers and runners with repetitive 14 days of free accommodation and meals while they work their trade. To add insult to injury, with support from the N.W.T Housing Corporation, these dealers are provided public housing. Why? Because they are on the housing list and we have to be fair with allocation of units. Input from housing board members with local knowledge is not taken into account because policy trumps local knowledge. Mr. Speaker, these dealers are targeting our Indigenous youth. Why? Because Indigenous youth are more exposed to recruitment and organized crime. All we have to do is look at the court docket and see who is filling our correctional centres. If this is to change, then we have to provide Indigenous youth with positive role models, with a positive home life, with a positive learning environment, safe places to participate in extracurricular activities, with protection from dealers beyond no contact orders, timely access to mental and addiction support, and with meaningful jobs. Mr. Speaker, the local drug trade today is much different than that of the past. It is organized, it has financial resources, it has weapons, it has an effective recruitment process, it is not troubled by authority, and it does not care who it hurts. Why do our youth want to belong to such an organization? It provides a false sense of acceptance. An acceptance not received at home, among peers, or society. It is a need of belonging which we, as family and society, have failed to provide. Mr. Speaker, the community of Hay River has lost a number of its youth to drugs and the drug trade. And we continue to let this happen. And as families mourn, they ask, what are the police doing? What are the courts doing? What are local and territorial politicians doing? And where are the supports? If there was ever a time to get serious about this issue, it is now. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Haver South. Member statements. Member statements. Member for Mumfree.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today, my statement will be regarding we're losing a lot of young people in the Northwest Territories and also in the Chinchon Nation. There's a lot of young people that we lost. Some of them I may mention, but I might not mention all. Just recently, this person is our brother, our uncle. His name is Freddie Bishop from YELLOWKNIFE. Not only him, Justin Tucho as well. He was living with someone from Bichakon, and last week they had passed on. But just recently, a young person, David Sangre's, his funeral is today. When we look at this situation, we also lost Kelly Washi, a young man. And just recently, I lost my brother as well. Why I am mentioning all this is because the alcohol and drug use is related to that. We lose a lot of young people because of this alcohol and drugs, the addiction. We need a treatment center. If we had a treatment center, you think these people will still be alive? We need an addiction center where people can work on themselves and start healing themselves. And also, there's a lot of people that work for health and social services. They need to go out to the community to reach out to these people. Would we have all these people alive today if we had more people reaching out to the people? As a government of Northwest Territories, we can make a powerful statement. All the time we make these powerful statements. But when we look out the window here, we see a lot of people that we're losing, that are passing on. I really disagree with that. When we talk, we need to walk our talk. So as a government, I want to send them a message. We want to prevent these things to our young people. Let's reach out to these people. Let's make available any kind of addictions programs that they could use. There's many resources out there that they can use. We can't keep on talking. I don't want to stand here again and talk about who had just passed on, because it's very difficult to do that. All these young people, we want to pray for them and pray for their families that are grieving. We want them to have a healing process. And that is my member statement. Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Mumfwee. Member statements. Member statements. Returns to oral questions. Returns to oral questions. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have a return to oral question asked by the member for N.W.T on March 4th, 2021 regarding Medevac services. In the 2020 calendar year, there were approximately 180 air ambulance transports for the communities of Paulatuk, Sax Harbor, Tuktoyaktuk, and Ulahaktuk. Mr. Speaker, the Med Response Program has bases in Yellowknife and Inuvik. There are 3 crews and planes in Yellowknife and 1 crew and plane in Inuvik. When Med Response receives a request, it is triaged to determine need and severity. The team looks at available resources and dispatches planes and crews as required. If there are 2 situations at the same time and only 1 resource available, there are a number of possible solutions. The team may redirect a current plane that has been dispatched to a lower priority patient. Dispatch a plane from Yellowknife Base if the Inuvik plane is not available, or in extreme cases, contact a partner air ambulance service in another jurisdiction, such as Edmonton, to dispatch a plane. Med Response does have a contingency plan when there is a need to access additional pilots or crew. The Med Response team can work with the air ambulance provider to pull in staff who are not part of the regular rotation. This is very rare, but it has been done in the past. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Returns to oral questions. Returns to oral questions. Member for Frame Lake.
Consent to go back to item 3 on the agenda, member statements, to allow our colleague from Cam Lake to make her statement. Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The member seeking unanimous consent to return to item 3, member statements. Are there any nays? There are no nays. You may conclude or continue with member statements. Member for Cam Lake.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, colleagues. Mr. Speaker, today American President Joe Biden announced a transportation-focused long-term economic recovery plan. During the Great Depression here in Canada, the federal government funded highway construction to stimulate the economy. And so in anticipation of our federal government's plan to unveil its budget on April 19th, I'd like to talk about roads, specifically the Mackenzie Valley Highway, or what I like to call the forgotten leg of the Trans-Canada Highway. The Trans-Canada Highway runs through excuse me, I'm catching my breath, Mr. Speaker. The Trans-Canada Highway runs through all 10 Canadian provinces from Victoria to St. John's. At 7,821 kilometers, it is the 4th longest highway. the second longest national highway in the world. Construction began in 1949 under St. Laurent's Liberal government. According to history books, the Trans-Canada Highway was complete in 1962 under Prime Minister Diefenbaker. But here in the N.W.T, I disagree. Like it or not, Canada's shores touch 3 oceans, not 2, and the Northern Territories are in fact located in Canada. In 1958, the federal government actually acknowledged this and committed to completing the Mackenzie Valley Highway as part of the Roads to Resources strategy. This construction began in 1972, but in 1977 was stopped as the Berger Inquiry began a subsequent 10-year moratorium on oil and gas. Over the past 15 years, we have picked away at this highway through cost-sharing agreements with the federal government. Completing the Mackenzie Valley Highway is an important economic and social development driver for the Northwest Territories. It stands to decrease cost of living, increase food security, increase housing opportunity, create safe passage for survivors of domestic violence, connect families, stimulate economic development, and connect southern Canada to the Arctic. The federal government needs to understand that 25-cent dollars don't work in the N.W.T. Our infrastructure deficit and social needs are too far behind to compete against one another, and asking us to choose between economic stimulus and the social supports needed to heal our territory is a cruel continuation of a history already marked by tragedy. While the Canadian government looks to revive the national economy, we in the North are asking pass the AED and give us a chance to join the fight. Mr. Speaker, today I challenge Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to finish what past Liberal governments did not, which is a true Trans-Canada highway. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Cam Lake. Member statements. Member statements. Recognition of visitors in the gallery. Recognition of visitors in the gallery. Acknowledgements. Acknowledgements. Oral questions. Member for Havers South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the drug trade is real. Drug use is real. People are dying. Families are being torn apart. So I'd like to ask the Minister of Justice, what is the Department of Justice doing to respond to increased illicit drug and substance abuse in our communities? Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Havers South. Minister responsible for Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've been asked about this a number of times in the House, and generally I say that when there's a demand, there's going to be a supply. The war on drugs has never been won. We've seen it played out across the world over the years. Obviously what we need is people to be able to access help. But that being said, I can't just pass the buck. You know, as the Minister of Justice, Justice does have a role in policing. And so one of the things that the Justice does is work with communities. They create community action plans to identify priorities. However, I think there's more that we could be doing. I'm from the same community as the member. You know, I get those calls from constituents who point out which houses have drug dealers and which ones just got new trucks and when they're going over to the border to grab drugs to bring back. So I'm aware that there's an issue, and we need to do more to address it. And so I'm having those conversations with the department now. You know, I don't run the RCMP. The RCMP, they are in control of enforcement. But what can we do to work more closely with them, and what can we do to support them to help address these issues? So I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Havers South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, it's time to stop discussing the issue, but we need to see some action. So I asked the Minister if he agrees that people need to speak up more in the communities, and what are we doing to provide opportunities for people to report issues related to drugs? Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Havers South. Minister responsible for Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And we have Crime Stoppers in the territory. It's a civilian non-profit organization that brings together police services, the media, and the community, and it's a place where community members can report crimes that they see and provide this information to police. I know when I drive into Hay River, I see a little Crime Stoppers sign. However, I think, like I said, we can be doing more. I know that when the health department runs a new program, you see ads on every single social media platform. You see it everywhere you go. You know, what are we doing to help to get the word out there that there is this avenue and that people need to participate in crime prevention and reporting crimes. We have lots of comments in here about drug dealers and bootleggers, but the police need evidence to make arrests and ultimately convictions. So, those are some of the things we're doing. What we need to do is make the N.W.T. a worse place to do business for drug dealers. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Haver South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If somebody reports suspected drug traffickers or drug dealers, one thing they do is they fear for their life, not only for their own life, but for the life of their family members as well. So what supports are there for people who speak up and are worried for their safety? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Haver South. Minister responsible for justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't have that particular information on hand, but I'd be happy to get that back to the member because it's an important point. If we're asking people to speak up, we want to make sure that they know that they're going to be supported. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary. Member for Haver South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the reality is that the drug trade is organized. So what is the department doing specifically in response to organized crime? What are we not doing that we need to do? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Haver South. Minister responsible for justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In 2018, the N.W.T. and the federal government signed an agreement, and that was to develop it was under the Public Safeties Canada's Guns and Gangs Funding Initiative. And since that time, money has been coming into the territory that has been funding research, for one thing. There have been subject matter experts that have gone into the different communities in Fort Smith and Hay River. They're going to be going to Betchico and Inuvik and Yellowknife to examine the issue so that we can help come up with some of these solutions. There's also a budget for community-based crime prevention projects this year in 21-22, and all the communities have been notified that they can submit proposals to create some of these projects, because a lot of crime prevention is really community driven, and we need that community support, and we need things to be sustainable. Often there's one or two people in a community who are really gung-ho, and if they leave or something happens, then programs can fall apart. So we really need full community support, and through this fund we're hoping to provide that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Framley.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. My question is for the Minister of Industry, Tourism and Investment. I described in my statement the lack of a coherent public registry when it comes to our management of petroleum exploration and development rights. 7 years after devolution and 19 months after changes to the legislation were passed, I think the public and operators deserve a lot better. So can the Minister tell us whether she agrees that we can and should be doing a lot better with regard to public access to petroleum rights information? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Frame Lake. Minister responsible for Industry, Tourism and Investment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I don't think this is the first time a member has raised this concern. And I can say I'm right now on the ITI website and searching it and finding that process to be fairly simple. That said, Mr. Speaker, I don't want to continue in circles. I have contacted, after hearing the member's statement, contacted the department. What I'd like to suggest is that we have members sit down with members of ITI to actually look at this website, determine what's not working, determine what could be more clear so that we don't have to keep coming back and having this conversation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Framley.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I think I've got a pretty good memory, but I don't think I've raised this issue on petroleum rights before, but I'm always happy to talk to the Minister. But I outlined how there's at least 3 separate sets of information about petroleum rights on the ITI web pages. So can the Minister tell us whether it's her intention to set up a coherent public registry and when that might happen? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Frame Lake. Minister responsible for ITI.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I was listening earlier to some of the other examples given. I've tried to use some of the other resources that were named and found them very difficult. As I've said, I'm right now looking at the section on oil and gas licenses and finding it that meets the needs that I have. So I'm in the same situation that, yes, while I think this issue has come up generally, that the ITI website doesn't provide sufficient transparency to meet the regulations requirements or the legal requirements that we have. We want to achieve that. We want to be useful to the public. So again, I'm going to suggest that I'll connect with the member to make sure that we are doing what we can to have a registry that achieves all of the goals that the public needs and that the public has for us. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I want to thank the Minister for that. As part of the first round of changes to our petroleum legislation, we thought we'd plugged holes like the significant discovery license giveaways and flipped the secrecy onus to make information public. Further changes were promised, including an examination of royalties and perhaps even a legislative requirement for a public registry. So can the Minister tell us when the second round of legislative changes will actually take place and whether a requirement for a public registry for petroleum rights will be part of that work? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Frame Lake. Minister responsible for ITI.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, there is work obviously happening with respect to royalties, more on the mineral resources sector. And we're always looking for obviously opportunities to ensure that the systems and processes that are in place are working effectively. There's not an intention to review the Petroleum Resources Act again, but I recognize that there's been some comments from committee in the end of the 18th Assembly about other improvements that might be available. So again, I'm somewhat in the situation of saying there's no planned review of the Act at this moment. There is work happening with respect to royalties. There is work happening with respect to improving that, that system, looking at socioeconomic agreements, etc. If there's more that can be done, again, it may well be that there are ideas that the member has that would be helpful to hear directly so that I can answer that in a way that is more useful than me saying what is or isn't already happening, since I suspect there's more to it than what I may be aware of at the moment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary, Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I recognize I've got a bit of an advantage, and as I was in the last Assembly, but all you have to do is turn back to the original discussion paper on this topic, and it was put forward as a set of targeted changes, that there was going to be a broader review later. Well, I'm happy to talk to the Minister about that, but I was never really in favor of ITI administering subsurface rights when the department has a conflicting mandate to promote resource development. That's exactly what the kind of situation that public reviews of the Gulf of Mexico oil drilling disaster said should be avoided. You shouldn't have a regulator also in charge of promoting a particular resource. So subsurface rights administration should be transferred, in my opinion, to the Department of Lands, which is already in the business of managing the surface rights. So can the Minister say why having the same department managing the rights and promoting the industry is not a conflict of interest, and when she expects that rights administration will be transferred to another, more suitable agency? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Frame Lake. Minister responsible for industry, tourism and investment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the N.W.T is certainly not alone in the way that we administer and manage all of the responsibilities of government, including both promotion of the sector as well as regulation of the sector. The three territories, to my understanding, have all three very similar approaches in terms of structuring this work. And similarly, at least certainly on the mineral resources sector, Mr. Speaker, there's a similarly even split between different jurisdictions and managing. Again, on the mineral resource sector, I haven't had a chance to review it today for the petroleum resources sector, but again, with respect to having a finance department or an economic development department or a natural resources department, administering both, that is not an uncommon thing to have a shared responsibility. You have resource experts doing that work, but not necessarily the same people. At the end of the day, though, Mr. Speaker, it's one government. So the entire N.W.T is going to be here doing that work, whether it's a different department or a different division within that department. There should be rules and laws in place to ensure that there is no conflict, that we are transparent, and that we are providing accountability in a public forum, whether it's within one department or within different divisions of the same government. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for the N.W.T.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wasn't going to ask any questions today, but I got my answers back from the Minister in regards to Medevac in my riding of N.W.T, and I'm looking for the Bodell. Mr. Speaker, with med response aircraft and teams, I did ask for the tag numbers on those identifications for the aircraft that's providing services for Medevac service. I'm wondering, why do we only have one aircraft in Inuvik and 3 down in Yellowknife? Usually they had 2 broken, 3 into Yellowknife and 2 in the Delta. We always had a spare aircraft in Inuvik capable of flying patients out when they're called upon. And why is that? Where's that aircraft, and why don't we have it? Because time is of the essence on medical problems that we've been having. And I know that some of my residents in N.W.T have been waiting 8, sometimes 6 to 7 hours because max duty time for the aircraft pilots has maxed out. So, starting off, where's the second aircraft for Inuvik? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for N.W.T. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry, I don't have an answer to the question about why there isn't a second aircraft in Inuvik. I do want to say that the average response time is 4 hours and 31 minutes, so I'm not sure what 6 or 7 hours is about. Thank you.
Minister, oral questions. Member for N.W.T.
Speaker, yeah, average time, 4 hours, 4.5 hours. I had some constituents that have been waiting 6 to 7 hours. So I guess that's one of the long waits that they're having to stand by for. Why isn't there a second aircraft in Inuvik? We have 3 down here. They're being used, bringing patients to Edmonton, and we need the second aircraft in Inuvik. Acknowledgements Air usually had 2 aircraft when they had the contract. I don't know where med response comes into play in regards who owns the aircraft. Are they leasing them? Should be more clarity in regards to where's the second plane. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
For N.W.T. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this is the second time the member has asked this question. The answer is that I do not have the information. I will find the information and get it back to him in the next session. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for N.W.T.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, would the minister reconsider having a second aircraft sitting in Inuvik at either Acknowledgements Air or whatever aircraft provider? They should be looking into having a second aircraft for the safety of our constituents in the Bodell as a whole. Would she consider talking to Med Response and getting a second aircraft? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
For N.W.T. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'll take that question on notice.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Oral questions. Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my questions are for the Minister of Human Resources. First question, is there a system in place to connect student financial assistance and human resources in order to help post-secondary students identify viable career placements within the N.W.T? Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Great Slave. Minister responsible for Human Resources, Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, Mr. Speaker, the Department of Finance as well as ECNE do right now work together in order to promote the internship program that we have, as well as to promote the summer student program that is right now open and to which I'm hoping summer students are actively putting their names forward, and to post-secondary students who are currently using SFA. They do receive that information about the internship programs and the summer student programs. And again, happy to have any opportunity I can to promote that. Those programs are now open and taking names. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to help the Minister promote her programs. Can the Minister speak to what career options or programs are available within the N.W.T that are made available to high school students in order for them to plan their careers in the Northwest Territories? Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Great Slave. Minister responsible for Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, Human Resources staff do attend career fairs that happen across communities and attend at different schools in order to promote and make students aware of opportunities in the GNWT. There, of course, are now going to be career counselors coming out through EC&E in the new year to help also to promote and assist with different options and make students aware of their different career opportunities. There's the Indigenous Career Gateway program that looks specifically to Indigenous candidates who might need some support to breach a gap between what is in a job requirement and what their skill set might be coming out of high school. But that's a program that right now, as I understand, in the last few years, in fact, has grown and is doing very well this year. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it's been a continuous improvement in order to support the continual training and education of students. So again, the summer student program is open to students who might be going to post-secondary in the fall. You know, and I list all these things, and yet I do want to acknowledge, Mr. Speaker, that I heard the story that was told by the member. I am receiving my own inquiries from constituents. We can always do more to promote our programs, so I am still actively looking at what else we can be doing to better improve awareness and involvement of students in our summer student program. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Great Slave.
Mr. Speaker, and Mr. Speaker, those were somewhat ECE-related questions, so I think it speaks well to the ministers breaking down their silos that the Minister of Finance could answer some of that, so I appreciate that. My next question is, what incentive does the GNWT have to hire Northwest Territories graduates when the federal funding formula actually encourages the GNWT to hire from outside? And I believe we were all told when we come in one of the best ways to increase our revenues was to encourage more people to move to the Northwest Territories. Can the minister speak to how this conflicts with our priority to hire more northern students? Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Great Slave. Minister responsible for Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I enjoy this question. It's not dissimilar to one that I think the member has asked previously, and it's what's interesting about it is trying to figure out whether or not, in fact, the incentive of having more people in the territory should be the thing that we are looking at, the $30-some thousand that we get from the federal government, when we consider that for every resident that's here, we have to still provide education and sometimes housing, healthcare services. So it's not that we get the free money, we're getting money to be commensurate with the programs and services that we need to provide. So I certainly don't, in my role as Finance Minister, look at it as a one-for-one connection that for every person that comes, we get pure, simple money. That said, growing the population of the Northwest Territories to bring upon economic diversification is a good thing. Growing the population of the Northwest Territories to support our residents is a good thing. Having opportunities for northern graduates to be part of the public service is a good thing. So I guess I kind of want my cake and I want to eat it too, Mr. Speaker. I want to make sure that we are supporting our northern residents, ensuring that they are having those opportunities, but I don't see that as being a reason to not also bring people to the north to expand and diversify, whether it's the economy or our communities. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary, Member for Great Slave.
Mr. Speaker, I too like cake, so I hope I get to spend some time with the minister eating that cake with her. My last question is a slightly different tack. How many employees within the GNWT are on transfer assignments? And while those transfers are taking place, how is Human Resources and Cabinet ensuring that the backfill is being done correctly and that client service isn't suffering? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Great Slave. Minister responsible for Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I was able to find the first answer simply, which is a number, which is that as of, I believe, in February, there were 708 staff on various transfer assignments. As for sort of the more general sense of what are we doing in terms of managing those employees and ensuring the backfills are done properly, I mean, certainly, Mr. Speaker, I have confidence in the people of Human Resources to be doing exactly that, to be monitoring and managing those systems. As far as being able to provide some background on how backfills have worked and on the numbers, that is one where I would offer to get back to the member just so that I suspect there are actually tracking mechanisms in place that I simply don't have access to here. So I will gather that information up and provide it accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Oral questions. Member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Presently, the Department of Municipal Affairs is consulting with Ingram Trail constituents, and they've given them the option of paying $1.7 million to start up providing fire services, and then thereafter $1.2 million annually. And I'm a little confused in the resources provided. There's no real explanation of what these numbers are, where they came from, or what they're going to get. So can I just have some explanation of what that $1.7 million and thereafter $1.2 million would actually be paying for? Is it buying a fire truck? Is it hiring staff? What is that doing? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Yellowknife North. Minister responsible for Municipal and Community Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member for his question and his constant advocating for Ingram Trail. But I want to make it very clear to the territory as well too that Ingram Trail is located outside of a municipality. It's a cabin built up area designated now as a recreational area. It is not designated as a hamlet charter community municipality. So extending our services outside of the boundary, I'm not familiar with the agreement that they may have had with the city in the years to come. Now the city has decided to discontinue that agreement for Ingram Trail. I want to just also comment and say that throughout the territory we do have built up areas such as these throughout the territory, and looking at providing services to Ingram Trail, I'm very mindful of the time that it would take from Yellowknife into Ingram Trail to fight a fire. I would I take all those into consideration as well too. But just to get back to the member's question about the funding that he had requested, the 1.7, that was a number that was provided by the City of Yellowknife, and exactly looking for staff and supports and training and equipment as well. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the unfortunate reality here is that the residents who, built their houses and, have lived out there for decades with fire services kind of expected them to continue. And now the city and the N.W.T are in some sort of fight over jurisdiction, and it seems the city wants $1.7 million to, accommodate this. And the loss is really to the people, to my constituents, while this kind of fight between governments occurs. But I never viewed this as a $1.2 million annual problem. I thought the city was, more in the $100,000 range that we were going to get this to continue. It is one fire a year. So has the N.W.T gone back to the city and made a lower offer? And perhaps we could start this engagement and this conversation at a much more reasonable figure. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Yellowknife North. Minister responsible for MACA.
Yes, the department did go back to the City of Yellowknife to look at the reduced number and what it would cost for fire services. I also want to elaborate as well too that we did speak to the community of Deda as well, as they were interested in providing fire services as well. But I just really want to emphasize on the distance. The distance, this is a cabin built up area. I know there's residents at Ingram Trail, but this is not a community, and it's not a disagreement between a municipality and the N.W.T. It's finding a solution, an adequate solution, and looking at who are we going to train, who is going to actually offer the services. If we do come to an agreement, and if the government had said, okay, here we are, we have money to fund the fire services, there is nobody that wants to provide that service right now. And looking at and working with with the City of Yellowknife, it's almost putting them at an obligation to saying, this service is required. We are continuing those conversations with the City of Yellowknife, but we are in a really different scenario right now. The N.W.T MACA provides funding to the municipalities. We do not provide funding to cabin built-up areas. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Yellowknife North.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And this is stemming from some larger, long-standing issues where the N.W.T and federal government gave a bunch of people fee simple. They started allowing more and more leases, and they created a cabin built-up area, as the minister refers to it. But it's not designated as anything. And people on the trail pay taxes every year and receive no services. They live off-grid. They don't see power, water, or sewer. So it's fallen into this area where the minister is completely right. It's confusing who exactly is responsible for what. But one of the concerns I have is that the department's going out and they're consulting that this $1.2 million annually would have to be paid completely by the residents of the trail at a rate of $4,000 a year, which would be higher than the average property taxes in Yellowknife. It would be higher than any other community pays in property taxes. It's a figure that has no basis in how any of our built-up areas were designated or not. So is the Department of Municipal and Community Affairs willing to pay for any part of an agreement that could be reached going forward? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Yellowknife North. Minister responsible for MACA.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The short answer, no. You know, and we're looking at a possibility and an agreement with Ingram Trail and continue talks with the City of Yellowknife. We are going out there, we are talking to residents, we are making an effort, but it's the built-up area. This is a cabin area. Throughout the Northwest Territories, we have areas throughout the territory that, you know, what are we going to start doing? Are we going to be going out to each cabin lease, and are we going to be starting to fight those fires? And looking at this Ingram Trail, it's very unique. We are conducting conversations with the residents at Ingram Trail, and we continue speaking with the City of Yellowknife. I appreciate the member bringing this up, and I hope that we're able to come to a solution. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary, member for Yellowknife North.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I guess, you know, if it was the department's position that at no point was the N.W.T going to pay for any of this service, it would have been very helpful to know that in October, because it completely changes the whole conversation if they had to approach the city and completely fund this with their own taxes. Currently, residents on the Ingram Trail, they pay taxes every year. They receive zero services for those taxes. Is the minister willing to take some of the taxes that residents pay and use those taxes that already exist as, you know, a portion of any agreement that could be reached going forward? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Yellowknife North. Minister responsible for MACA.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Department of Municipal and Community Affairs is responsible for the assessment. We are not responsible for collecting the taxes. But I just, you know, I don't want to you know, I want to let the member know that the conversation that would have happened in October, in November, December, this is the result of the conversation, and looking at the 1.7 million that was not identified before Christmas, and now we have numbers. We are trying to work with the residents. We are getting out there. We are doing the assessments and trying to come together to find a solution. And this is going to continue conversation that is happening between my department and with the residents of Ingram Trail, and also continuous conversation with the community of Deda and with the City of Yellowknife. So there is a lot of effort that's being made to come up and come to a solution for Ingram Trail. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Kamloops.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my questions today are for the Minister of the Northwest Territories Housing Corporation. I've spoken numerous times in the House before about the community residency policy, and that's a policy that demands that N.W.T residents live in an N.W.T community for varying times up to 1 year before they can add their names to the public housing waitlist. Can the Minister of Housing speak to the goal of this policy? Thank you.
Thank you, member for Kamloops. Minister responsible for the Northwest Territories Housing Corporation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Through this policy, we have to display fairness and consistency throughout the territory. If we do not have this residency policy, we could have people throughout Canada coming into our territory and sitting on our wait list and having us not being able to properly and structurally, I want to say, allocate these units. We do have a strong and a long wait list, but the 1 year policy that has been created for residency for the Northwest Territories is for the people of the Northwest Territories and newcomers coming into the territory as well too. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Kamloops.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the Minister's reference to fairness, and I think that is a fair comment, and I think that fairness is important, and I think that fairness needs to be extended to the residents of the Northwest Territories, where we really do struggle with housing, and people want fair access to safe and secure housing. And so this policy doesn't only prevent people from the rest of Canada putting their name on public housing wait lists. It prevents Northwest Territories residents from putting their names on wait lists from other communities. And so I think that that's why I keep asking these questions, is because I think this policy really needs to be revamped. I think of different people across even Canada. When we look to our history, there's people that from the 60s scoop were were adopted out to other families and might be living in other regions of Canada and might want to return home. There are people living in Yellowknife that might want the opportunity to return to their birth community as well as people living in communities that might want to be able to move to Yellowknife. And so I think that we need to look at this. But I'm wondering if the minister can speak to what issue the community residency policy originally was trying to address and what was the original purpose of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Cam Lake. Minister responsible for housing.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The policy is to address the housing needs in that specific community. Since being Minister and responsible for the Housing Corporation, I've had several inquiries coming forward. We had families fleeing domestic abuse. We've had to relocate, and with that, we were able to work with those communities as well and the local LHOs that had created bylaws to address those unique situations. Also, we have students that are returning back to school, back from school, back to their home community, where we are able to hold their unit for them and being able to house them once they're upon their return. But then I also really want to stress that, you know, we need residency policy throughout the Northwest Territories. We need to show fairness and consistency. If we did not have this policy, we would have people and the waiting list exaggerated to a point where we weren't able to work with that strongly. And I want to be able to just really display that, or really acknowledge that I do see where people are moving around throughout the territory. They have very unique, different situations, but we also have a wait list of people that are local, that are from the community, that have been on the wait list 5, 3, 6 months, it doesn't matter, and we need to address the home community first. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Cam Lake.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I appreciate what the minister is saying about addressing the home community first and about making sure that people from the community have access to housing in that community. But sometimes what happens is people end up living in other communities for one reason or another. And I think there are other ways that we can address this policy and make it achieve kind of both of our ends. And so I'm wondering if the minister would be willing to look at community membership or land claim beneficiary membership in lieu of a community residency policy to ensure that even people who have moved away, who are still land claim beneficiaries of the region, are still able to be prioritized within the public housing waitlist. Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Cam Lake. Ministers responsible for housing.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The policy is created, as I said, fairness. The public housing is available for everybody. And looking at the residency requirements, I don't want to create silos and I don't want to create division amongst that waiting list and amongst decisions being made at the local community level. And looking at that, I just want to also elaborate that the Housing Corporation works strongly with the Indigenous groups throughout the territory. We just announced a $60 million co-investment fund that has been exhausted for the territory, and we do have Indigenous applications and people and groups that are coming forward that are wanting to address their wait list and their housing needs in their specific communities. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary. Member for Cam Lake.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Just as a final question today, I'm wondering if the Housing Corporation has ever reviewed the unintended consequences of this policy. And if yes, what have they found? And if not, why not? And would they be willing to look into that? Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Cam Lake. Minister responsible for housing.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, we have been speaking about this policy, but, you know, like I had said, that I want to make sure that the policy is fair. You know, we travel throughout the Northwest Territories, and I see the wait list myself, and I see the community residents that they are homeless. And they are traveling, and they are, you know, house to house. There's overcrowding. That's what I would like to address first. And then when we have community members that are wanting to move back into the Northwest Territories, we need to work with that, because already they're entering into one of our smaller communities. We already have a wait list that is significant. The need for housing, I hear you, it's pretty much a crisis in the territory. And I just want to elaborate and speak about the co-investment fund that that was a strong relationship that we did have with the federal government to exhaust that co-investment fund when the expiry date for that was 2028. We were able to exhaust it in 3 years. That displays what a housing crisis we have in the Northwest Territories. It's significant. We need more money to put houses on the ground. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Oral questions. Member for Hay River South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Hay River is preparing for spring breakup and possible flooding. It could be happening while we're sitting in May. So can the Minister of MACA confirm what supports the town of Hay River and residents can expect from her department during this breakup? And if any supports at all. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Hay River South. Minister responsible for Municipal and Community Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The town of Hay River had experienced this just this last spring. The Municipal and Community Affairs did provide assistance in working with those residents and looking at the affected areas. I will follow up with the member, as I was briefed at my last briefing for the town of Hay River, that they were working on a federal application for the disaster fund to work with those affected residents by the high water levels. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Hay River South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think she misunderstood my question. It was what supports and what are they going to do for this breakup this year? But in the fall of last year, due to high water levels and high winds, businesses and residents experienced loss and damage to infrastructure and property with little support and little to no financial support from this government. Can we expect the same treatment, or are we going to show some compassion if the same thing happens during this breakup? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Hay River South. Minister responsible for MACA.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just to comment on my reply, the application was submitted, supposed to be submitted to deal with the rising waters in Hay River, to deal with the residents that would be affected by the high water levels. MACA continues to support the community. We've just had a meeting with the town of Hay River. I will follow up with the member. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Hay River South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Minister confirm if MACA will have any representatives in Hay River during breakup to ensure that decisions are timely and support is there? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Hay River South. Minister responsible for MACA.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We will provide. My staff will provide support, as we do have a regional office in Hay River and we do have one in Fort Smith. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary. Member for Hay River South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of the issues that came up last year is that all any residents that were relocated during the breakup, I think most of them came to Yellowknife, and we've got Fort Smith with accommodation close by, and I'd like to see that we utilize those services well. I like to keep things in the South Slave if we can. So I'm hoping that the minister will provide, allow people to have an option of kind of where they want to go if they're required to evacuate. And if she can just comment on that, thank you.
Thank you, Member for Hay River South. Minister responsible for MACA.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Municipal and Community Affairs works very closely with communities with their emergency management plan. If this has been identified, we will be working closely with the community. And I have been given a briefing that we are going to be experiencing high water levels throughout the Northwest Territories. So we will be working closely with the communities. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Oral questions. Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I want to have some questions for the Minister of Industry, Tourism and Investment on significant discovery license for Husky Oil. There's supposed to be a notice issued under Section 18 of the Petroleum Resources Act when the Minister issues a new significant discovery license. I can't see such a notice for this license that might have replaced exploration license EL 494. It's also supposed to be published in the Gazette. I looked at the most recent for March. It's not there either, but there seems to be some kind of a placeholder document on the ITI website that indicates a significant discovery license 153 may have been issued on March the 16th. So can the minister confirm whether significant discovery license 153 was issued to Husky Oil on March the 16th? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Frame Lake. Minister responsible for industry, tourism and investment.
Mr. Speaker, significant discovery license 153 does cover a portion of the former EL 494, which is for Husky Oil operations, and that was issued on March the 16th. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I want to thank the Minister for that. It came about a week after I first raised the issue in the House. So can the Minister tell me whether there's any terms and conditions in that significant discovery license, because it's not posted to the website, that require any work to be undertaken as part of that significant discovery license, or any rental fees? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Frame Lake. Minister responsible for ITI.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, again, when the request is made, there's no discretion on the minister to issue the license. So I did, in fact, what was required, which was I shall issue the license, and so that was what was done. As far as the rental fee structure, as previously noted, again, in this instance, the advice received in the context of, again, of a situation where I have no discretion to issue the license, but with respect to a rental fee structure, there was none originally in the original call for bids or exploration license documents, and as such, the advice I've received and that I've relied on is that we will not be putting any one particular new rental fee structure in on this particular license. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I want to thank the Minister for clarifying that there are no rental fees required in this new significant discovery license. And she referenced how this is not, or she couldn't do it, I guess, back on March the 9th. And I want to quote from Hansard: "There is not a fair opportunity at this stage to be imposing items that weren't there previously." So saying that, gee, we didn't ask for it, or wasn't asked for it during the call for bids, so we couldn't include it now. Well, Mr. Speaker, I actually went and did some digging, and I found the call for bids, and I want to quote from this, and I'm going to table the document, and I did provide it to the Minister ahead of time. There's one quote from the call for bids for this area, and it says as follows, quote, "Rentals may be payable on lands included in a significant discovery license," end of quote. There we have, Mr. Speaker. The call for bids that went out included this clause that said you might have to pay some rental fees. The Minister had an opportunity to carry this through from the exploration license into the significant discovery license, and she didn't do it. Why didn't the Minister include this rental fee in the significant discovery license that was just issued? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Frame Lake. Minister responsible for industry, tourism and investment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, again, the issuance of the license is non-discretionary, so it was acting essentially well, there's no discretion to issue the license. With respect to adding terms or conditions under the new Act, there are some provisions where there may be some additional conditions required with the agreement of the proponent, and that was not an approach that was decided to be used in this case. Again, this is a situation that will not be occurring in the future. This is one of the last, if not the last, occasion where a proponent that existed under the previous regime is being brought into the new regime. I sought the expert opinion of the department. I sought, which included them seeking expert opinion or legal opinions from the Department of Justice. So, in part, what I think I'm hearing is that I should go back and get a second opinion or a third opinion or a different legal opinion. But at this point, the opinions that we've received in this context, again, unique at this stage and unlikely to be repeated, was to proceed as we have, and that is what we've done. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary, member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I want to thank the Minister for that. The difficulty is our government now is going to lose $21 million in potential revenue because the Minister would not carry forward the rental fee from the exploration license into the significant discovery license. That's $21 million that we could have collected on this that we just gave away. And so, and the minister talks about how she's got some kind of legal opinions that told her she couldn't do it. So I'd like to ask whether the minister can share that legal opinion, even if it has to be shared on a confidential basis with this side of the House. Mussey, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Frame Lake. Minister responsible for ITI.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I am not going to be in any position to share a confidential legal opinion. That typically sharing one's legal opinion waives legal privilege over it, no matter what efforts one might make to say that it's confidential or otherwise. So my understanding is that's a standing and that's a fairly common position to take, and that's the position we'll be taking. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Sir, oral questions. Oral questions. Returns to oral questions. Oh, member for Haver South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sorry about that. I just have one question. I would ask the Minister of Infrastructure if she agrees that it's important for especially for her department to visit all the communities, to talk to businesses, to talk to residents, and find out what's going on. So I'd ask her if she would be willing to come to Hay River for more than an hour and spend a couple of days there and go around and meet with some of the businesses in Hay River. And I know that the ones that she did meet with previously were very appreciative, and I know there's a lot of them asking me when she's coming back. So I'd like to be able to tell them thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Haver South, Minister responsible for infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, last week on my way back from Fort Smith, I took the opportunity to drive Highway 5 to be able to have a look at the highway from Fort Smith to Hay River, and was able to spend the night and fly out the next morning. And within that hour, I was able to spend time with the member, member and his buddies there having breakfast. So I see where the member's coming from in terms of going back to the community and be able to speak with some of his constituents. And I will work with the member to come up with dates and be able to come back to the community. And I just came from there a couple months ago, and I spent a couple days and spent some time with the member, toured MTS, went and looked at some of the Power Corporation facilities. So yeah, I'll work with the member to be able to figure out a time when I can go back. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Oral questions. Written questions. Written questions. Member for Kamloops.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my questions are for the Minister responsible for the Northwest Territories Housing Corporation and relate to vacant housing units. My first question is, can the Minister provide, as of March 31st, 2021, the number of vacant housing units by program, by community, and number two, for each vacant unit as of March 31st, 2021, can the Minister state how long each has been vacant? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Kamloops. Written questions. Written questions. Returns to written questions. Returns to written questions. Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a return to written question 25-19-2 asked by the member for Nunakput on March 10th, 2021 regarding Medevacs in Nunakput.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Returns to written questions. Returns to written questions. Replies to Commissioner's address. Replies to Commissioner's address. Petitions. Petitions. Reports of committees on the review of bills. Reports of committees on the review of bills. Reports of standing and special committees. Reports of standing and special committees. Tabling of documents. Tabling of documents. Minister responsible for finance.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to table the following document: interactivity transfers exceeding $250,000 for the period April 1st to December 31st, 2020. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Tabling of documents. Tabling of documents. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wish to table the following 5 documents: follow-up letter to oral question 509, mental health, Follow-up letter for oral question 518, e-health system and online patient portal. Follow-up letter to oral question 590, mental health concerns in small communities. Follow-up letter for oral question 677, independent living for seniors. And further to my return to written questions, health and social services breakdown of air ambulance transports as of March 2021. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Tabling of documents. Tabling of documents. Minister responsible for infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wish to table the following 3 documents. Plain language summary for Bill 24, an act to amend the Revolving Funds Act. 2021-2022 corporate plan, Northwest Territories Hydro Corporation, Northwest Territories Power Corporation, and a letter dated March 30th from N.W.T. Hydro and N.W.T. Power Corporation, President and CEO, to Minister Archie regarding 2020-2021 capital spending budget. Queen Aini, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Tabling of documents. Tabling of documents. Minister responsible for education, culture, and employment.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to table the following document, plain language summary for Bill 25, an act to amend the Education Act. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Tabling of documents. Tabling of documents. Minister responsible for Northwest Territories Housing Corporation.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to table the following document, Northwest Territories Housing Corporation 21-22 Consolidated Operating Budget. Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Tabling of documents. Tabling of documents. Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I'm very pleased to table 2 documents. The first one, 2010-2011 call for nominations, Central Mackenzie Valley, dated December 21st, 2010. Second document, 2010-2011 call for bids, Central Mackenzie Valley, dated February 19th, 2011. Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Frame Lake. Tabling of documents. Tabling of documents. Pursuant to Section 5 of the Indemnities, Allowances, and Expense Regulations of the Legislative Assembly and Executive Council Act, I wish to table the summary of members' absences for the period October 15th, 2020 to February 2nd, 2021. Okay. Tabling of documents. Tabling of documents. Notices of motion. Notices of motion. Motions. Member for Yellowknife North.
Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by the Honourable Member for Hay River North, that notwithstanding Rule 4, when this House adjourns on Wednesday, March 31st, 2021, that shall be adjourned until Thursday, May 27th, 2021. And further, that any time prior to May 27th, 2021, if the Speaker is satisfied, after consultation with the Executive Council and members of the Legislative Assembly, that the public interest requires that the House should meet at an earlier time during the adjournment, or at a time later than the scheduled resumption of the House. The Speaker may give notice, and thereupon the House shall meet at the time stated in such notice, and shall transact its business as if it had been duly adjourned to that time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Yellowknife North. Motion is in order to the motion. Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? Any abstentions? The motion is carried. Let's take a quick break for the other motion. Motions. Member for Kamloops.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, whereas Section 48, brackets 1 of the Human Rights Act provides for the establishment of an adjudication panel composed of at least 3 persons appointed by the Commissioner on the recommendation of the Legislative Assembly, and whereas Section 48, brackets 4 of the Human Rights Act provides that the members of the panel hold office during good behavior for a term of 4 years, with the exception of the first members appointed, and whereas there are currently 3 vacancies of the adjudication panel, and whereas the Board of Management is tasked with recommending individuals to the Legislative Assembly, and the Legislative Assembly is prepared to make a recommendation to the Commissioner, now therefore I move, seconded by the Honourable Member for Saw 2, that Mr. Sheldon Toner of Yellowknife, Northwest Territories, be recommended to the Commissioner of the Northwest Territories for appointment as a member of the Human Rights Adjudication Panel, effective immediately for a term of 4 years. And further, that Lou Siebert of Fort Smith, Northwest Territories, and Jay Sengupta of Hamilton, Ontario, be recommended to the Commissioner of the Northwest Territories for appointment as members of the Human Rights Adjudication Panel, effective immediately for a term of 4 years. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Cam Lake. Motion is in order to the motion. Question has been called. All those in favour? All those opposed? Any abstentions? The motion is carried. Motions. Notice is a motion for the first reading of bills. Notice is a motion for the first reading of bills. First reading of bills. First reading of bills. Second reading of bills. Second reading of bills. Consideration in Committee of the Whole of Bills and Other Matters. Consideration in Committee of the Whole of Bills and Other Matters. Report of Committee of the Whole. Report of Committee of the Whole. Third reading of bills. Third reading of bills. Mr. Clerk, will you ascertain if the Commissioner of the Northwest Territories, the Honourable Margaret Tom, is prepared to enter the chamber to assent bills? Thank you.
It's good to see you again, and all of the people since 2000 here we're on the First Nations land. I'm very thankful for that.
Assembly, good afternoon. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional territories and the sacred lands of the Chief Dry Geese and the Yellowknife First Nation. And we are honored and blessed to be working on their traditional lands, keeping in mind that we honor that Masi. It's great to see you all. It's been a long time. And I'm honored to be in this great house to address our government. We find ourselves 12 months into a worldwide public health crisis with the COVID-19 virus. Since last March the 11th, when the pandemic was declared, there is now a vaccine to fight it, which will save countless of lives if we all do our part to get vaccinated and continue to be vigilant with the public health recommendations and protocols. My husband and I have both received the first and second dose of the vaccine, so we encourage our family and friends to get vaccinated as well. I, as the Commissioner of the Northwest Territories, was the first in our community of Fort Providence, followed by the First Nation Chief, Hamlet Mayor, Member of Parliament, and Métis representative to receive the first dose of the vaccine on January the 18th, 2021. I was anxious to receive the vaccine, not only for my own health and peace of mind, but to be a role model to some reluctant community members, to show them that it is okay and safe to get this vaccine. Never in my life was I so eager and grateful to get a needle in my arm. We need to continue to be extremely diligent in taking all public health precautions set out by our Chief Public Health Officer for the N.W.T, Dr. Cami Condola, and her dedicated staff. The public health precautions and getting vaccinated will ensure the safety of our health, the health of our families, our friends, and neighbors across our territory. We must be aware, accepting, and vigilant about how serious this pandemic is and of its very severe and dangerous potential consequences to our people and to our economy. Not many people are aware that several retired Northern nurses have returned to work and are working extra long hours to help with the public vaccination clinics across our territory. Their dedication to the profession of nursing and to their communities is so greatly appreciated. Masi cho. I want to thank our government departments, and in particular, the Department of Health and Social Services for all the research, preparation, and updated information provided to us on a regular basis to keep us all informed so that we will make sound decisions regarding the COVID-19 pandemic. Tough decisions continue to be made so that we can all be safe and healthy. Masi cho. Yes, the time will come again when we can gather, hug, celebrate, and dance again. Spring is in the air. As we welcome the sunshine, longer daylight hours, and activities outside of our homes within our respective social bubbles, we must take extreme safety precautions as we travel and play on this great land of ours. Having said that, know that you all need a well-deserved break to breathe and to ground yourselves. May you be blessed with safe travels to your homes, families, communities in your ridings, and enjoy a happy, blessed Easter season with your loved ones. Now, as Commissioner of the Northwest Territories, I am pleased to assent to the following bills. Bill 3, an act to amend the Public Highways Act. Bill 12, an act to amend the Apprenticeship, Trade, and Occupation Certification Act. Bill 13, an act to amend the Interpretation Act. Bill 14, an act to amend the Securities Act. Bill 16, an act to amend the Income Tax Act. Bill 20, an act to amend the Employment Standards Act. Bill 26, Supplementary Appropriation Act, brackets, Operations Expenditures, bracket number 3, 2020-2021. Bill 27, Supplementary Appropriation Act, Infrastructure Expenditures, number 3, 2020-2021. Bill 28, Appropriation Act, Operations Expenditures, 2021-2022. Merci Cho, thank you. Huanani, merci beaucoup, Juana.
Order.
Colleagues, on behalf of this House, I thank the Commissioner, the Honourable Margaret M. Tom, for being here today. It is always a pleasure to have her in the chamber. I also thank our interpreters for their hard work and dedication throughout this sitting. It is through their hard work that we are able to do our part to use, preserve, and revitalize our language. Colleagues, I know that this was a long sitting, and I want to take a moment to thank each of you for your hard work and professionalism. Although you didn't always see eye to eye, you have been able to work together respectfully and collaboratively for the benefit of our residents and our territory. Members, this is consensus government in action. We would not be able to complete our work without the contractors and staff of the Legislative Assembly, as well as staff throughout the government. Their efforts enable us to be successful in our work, and I want to take this time to thank them all for their contributions. Colleagues, the cold days of winter are behind us. And as we head into spring, our days are getting warmer and longer. Many of us and many of our constituents will be heading out on the land to participate in our spring hunts. If you will be out on the land, I encourage you to be safe, be sober, and to harvest respectfully. Finally, I want to remind all residents to continue to be vigilant in terms of the ongoing situation with COVID-19. As a territory, we have been very fortunate. I encourage all members and residents to continue their diligent efforts to combat the spread of COVID-19. Thank you, colleagues. Safe travels home. Mr. Clerk, orders of the day.
Seventh, 2021, 1:30 p.m. Prayer, minister statements, member statements, returns to oral questions. Oral question 698-19-2. Recognition of visitors in the gallery. Acknowledgements, oral questions, written questions. Returns to written questions, replies to Commissioner's address. Petitions, reports of committees on the review of bills, reports of standing and special committees. Tabling of documents. Notices of motion, motions. Notices of motion for first reading of bills, second reading of bills, consideration in committee of the whole of bills and other matters, report of committee of the whole, third reading of bills, orders of the day.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Before we leave, I'd just like to wish you all a happy Easter and safe travels home once again. Masi. This House stands adjourned until Thursday, May 27th, 2021 at 1:30 p.m.
3? Clerk 3, Andrew.
You too.
Andrew? Clerk 3? Yeah? Must be a... Yeah? No? Yeah? Clerk 3? Am I playing around with buttons? Clerk 3?